If you ever looked at a bicycle brake, this is a caliper, and basically it's a spring, and when you squeeze the trigger, it's squeezing the brake shoes onto the outside of the wheel. The concept is the same with the car, but instead of the brake shoes squeezing the outside of the wheel, it's squeezing a rotor which is attached to the wheel. And the only big difference is the brake caliper on a car or a truck works on pressurized fluid, which is brake fluid, and then pushes the caliper both in to squeeze the brake shoes together and out to release the brake shoes. It's always a good idea to block the wheels on these trucks as they have a tendency to roll away. Now pop the center cap off and break the lug nuts loose, but don't take them all the way off, just break them loose. Now jack the truck tire off the ground so you can spin the wheel, and then remove the wheel and let the truck down on a jack stand, and make sure that jack stand is solid and under the frame of the truck. I always lube up the lug bolts at this point, just to give it time to penetrate, so when you put it all back together the lug nuts go on a lot easier, and this also makes it easier on the next guy. I also put one or two lug nuts back on and pressed against the rotor just to keep the rotor in line and from moving around. This will make things a lot easier for you when you go to take that caliper off and put it back on. Here I am loosening up the bleeder screw, and usually you get a little bit of brake fluid seeping out at this point. But another thing happened here where no brake fluid at all seeped out, and even after I took the bleeder screw all the way out. So something was up with this, and it was time to get down to the heart of the matter. Looks like whoever did these brakes the last time did not bleed them, and there was an air pocket right at that caliper. And as for this bleeder screw, it needs to be cleaned up and just the end sanded off. You just want to get the corrosion off the bleeder screw. You don't want to go down into the metal. And there's a hole, it's hollow. There's a thin hole running through the bleeder screw and coming out on the side of the screw. So we're going to blow that hole out right here. And before I put that bleeder back in, I like to lube them up and keep them clean. So that's what you see me doing here. Sometimes I'll lube up the caliper bolts, but then they just kind of get slippery, so I usually wait until I'm putting them back in to lube them up. You don't want to tighten this bleeder screw all the way down. You don't want to shut it off. I'm just getting it in the threads and leaving it there for now. And here you see me prying the caliper apart and open and trying to make room to get that caliper off the rotor. And at this point you'll see brake fluid coming out of the bleeder screw, and that tells me that piston in the caliper is closing. The brake shoes are prying apart from the rotor. Now be careful here. You don't want to gouge up your rotor, so you don't want to put a bunch of weight into the rotor. bolts on these Chevy calipers, they're Allen head. That's a 3/8 Allen head. And the problem with this is Allen wrenches are usually, this is the longest one I've ever seen, and it's only 5 or 6 inches. And you just can't get enough leverage on it because those bolts are torqued pretty tight. And I've seen people put these in, they go in on the back side of the caliper so you're kind of blind on it. And people put these on and they start hammering on it. And the problem with that is they wind up stripping them because this will cock just a hair sideways, and they'll hammer that, and before you know it, the bolt head's stripped. And now they're playing hell just taking their caliper. Now you could use this and just put a pipe on the end of it and you'll get plenty more leverage. Just make sure this doesn't cock sideways on you. Make sure it's seated in there real good and stays good while you got that pipe on there turning. I use this, which is the same concept, and it's not much longer, and I still put a pipe on the end of it. It's a 3/8 Allen head too. So just be careful not to strip it, because then you have a world of new problems just trying to take the caliper off and taking a look at the brakes. Let's move on. Both brake pads on this side of the car are really in bad shape, and if you let this go too long, you're going to ruin your rotor, because the rivets that they put in to make these brake pads will start riding against your rotor, and it'll put deep gashes in it, and then you're going to have to buy a new rotor. Many parts stores and little shops, they used to have machines and put these rotors on and turn them and take off like a 1/16 of an inch on both sides of the rotor. But they don't do it anymore. It just doesn't make financial sense, because they started mass producing these rotors and they just kept getting cheaper and cheaper, and now you can get a decent rotor for like $22. And here you see me using a big C-clamp to close that caliper all the way and see if we can get some more fluid coming out of that bleeder screw. If you're going to do it this way, use a block of wood, some kind of wood or steel or really hard plastic, to put over that piston on the caliper, and this way you won't scar it up. If you don't have a big C-clamp like this, you can use a pair of channel locks. It's just going to have to be a really big pair, and you're going to have to put a rag or something over that piston. You just don't want to scar up that piston, because it's moving in and out of that caliper, and if you scar it, it's going to seize up on you. And the main reason that you want to close this piston as far as you can is to make room for the new brakes. If that caliper is not closed all the way, you're not going to have enough room between the brake pads to fit that rotor back in. So you're going to play hell putting the caliper back on. Once everything is tightened back down, you have to make sure that there's actual brake fluid in the master cylinder reservoir, so check that out. Over the years, I've seen all kinds of creative ways for a person to bleed the brakes by themselves, but nothing works better than having a helper. If you have to go to the local bar and get the bartender to help you, then that's what you have to do. But we have to bleed these brakes at this point. So you tell your helper to pump the brakes 5 or 6 times until they start feeling back pressure on those brakes. And then you tell them to hold the brake right there, and they're going to keep on pressing and keep on putting weight on that brake, and you're going to cut that brake pedal loose by letting the air out of that caliper. And when that happens, that brake is going to go to the floor, and this is the important part. They have to keep that brake to the floor until you tighten that bleeder screw back up. So the first thing you have to do is tighten the bleeder screw, tell them to pump up the brakes, and then you're going to loosen that bleeder screw and you're going to let the air out of the brakes. Once that's done, you can tell your helper they can let the foot off the brake, and you're going to repeat that process over and over and over for as many times as it takes to get all the air out of those brake lines and calipers. What you're doing is you're pressing all the air to the end of that bleeder screw and you're letting it out. So when you drive the car, all you're getting is fluid and no air at all in the system. And don't forget to top off the brake fluid one more time. And there you go, Scooby. Oh, what's next? I have probably 30 projects that I'm currently working on. And I'm still restoring this Lincoln Town Car, and that's coming along nice, and I'm in the last phase of that restoration. And that's it. I can't think of anything more. Vote for me and I'll set you free. Free beer, free pizza for every American, and I will invent world peace, and everybody will be happy and drunk. Peace, man. Thanks.